For NYUp.com and Syracuse.com, I am Matt Parrino, and the Buffalo Bills' Week 3 opponent is the Minnesota Vikings. So I dialed up a former Buffalo expatriate, Matthew Coller, who's now at ESPN 1500 in Minnesota. He is the Vikings beat reporter. Matthew, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, sure thing.
Awesome. So we have a big game here to start. Kind of an interesting one, and one that made some national headlines last week. The Vikings and the Packers tied 29-29. Came down to the wire. Give us a quick recap of what went down in that one.
Oh, I wish I could give you a quick recap because so many things went down in this one that we'll be talking about it for a really long time. I think the lead of the story is that the Vikings had to cut their kicker right after the game because he missed a 35-yarder right from the middle of the field. They even lined him up perfectly, and he missed 3 field goals in the game. So the Vikings left Lambeau Field feeling like they should have been 2-0, and then there's a bunch of other things that led to that. I mean, there's a Clay Matthews hit on Kirk Cousins that negated an interception that would have won the game for the Packers, and it was overall just a battle between those two teams that look like they're both Super Bowl contenders, and it came down to a bunch of different factors, a bunch of different game-changing plays and calls, and nobody left happy. I was walking from the press box. You have to go outside in Lambeau to the locker room, and so you walk like over the concourse, and it was just quiet. Like the fans weren't saying anything. No one was celebrating. No one was yelling. No one was angry. People just walked out in shocked silence. So it was one of the weirdest things that I've ever covered.
Mm-hmm. On the Bills side of things, not the best start to the season. I think most experts didn't have the Bills winning a ton of games, maybe even contention for that first overall pick. But, when it's been bad this season for the Bills, it's been very bad. One bright spot last week, Josh Allen did get his first start. The rookie had some moments, threw 2 interceptions, but they were kind of late, and he was trying to kind of force the issue. But, some defensive issues across the board, and this defensive pass rush, a big concern going into the season, has been non-existent for the most part until the second half of last week when they finally started dialing up some pressure. Sean McDermott took over play calling duties from Leslie Frazier. They don't know what they're going to do with that going forward. It could be McDermott who continues to call the plays. But the defense looked like they were engaged in that second half, flying around to the ball, and they're going to need to do that. And that segues nicely into my next topic here. Kirk Cousins was brought in by the Vikings to replace Case Keenum in the offseason. So far, it seems so good. Put up big numbers last week, 4 touchdowns. I mean, it seems like things are clicking already. Is that the case?
Yeah, at times I would agree that they have. And when you look at the box score and you see 425 yards and 4 touchdowns, you would say, how could they ever not be clicking in that situation? But 146 yards and 1 touchdown came after the negated interception. And then Kirk showed that he has the ability to make some big-time throws. He had a 75-yard touchdown to Stephon Diggs that traveled 61 yards in the air. And he made a brilliant throw to Adam Thielen in the end zone that ended up leading to a game-tying 2-point conversion. So he's made a lot of great throws in the first 2 weeks. But there have also been times where this offense has not been perfect. And one of the reasons is that the offensive line is battling some injuries and also wasn't really that strong to begin with. So against San Francisco, Cousins went 0 for 7 in the fourth quarter, and they kind of left the door open for Jimmy Garoppolo to possibly come back in that game. Now, the defense usually tends to bail this team out, and they did in week 1. And then in week 2, they weren't as good, of course, going up against Aaron Rodgers, and got behind in the game in part because Kirk Cousins and the offense couldn't get going in the first half. They only scored 7 points. They didn't finish drives. And we've seen at times through these first 2 weeks some miscommunications with wide receivers, some throws going to where no one is. That's happened in both weeks. So I think that there's still some adjusting going on to Kirk Cousins being in Minnesota, working with a new offensive coordinator, all new teammates. I think that's still happening, but I also think for the locker room and for him being the leader and the unquestioned franchise quarterback of this team, that having the comeback like he did and leading basically 2 game-winning drives that were missed field goals in overtime and a game-time drive, I think that has done a lot for him making it clear that he is the franchise quarterback in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting. The big knock on Cousins, I feel like, over the years is he makes some wild plays, but he tends to make some mistakes. And you even saw it in that game last week. I mean, down the stretch in the fourth quarter, he put a couple balls out there. One was intercepted and luckily was called back because there was a late hit on the quarterback. But, if you're a Bills fan in this game, you have to be at least somewhat, interested in the fact that this defense, made its name last year by forcing turnovers. They haven't been able to do that early on, but I feel like to have success in this game, you have to put Kirk Cousins in uncomfortable positions and take advantage of opportunities. If you don't take advantage of every opportunity in this game, if you're the Bills, 17-point underdog, we didn't even talk about that, it's not going to be close.
I mean, it looks to me like the Bills don't have a whole heck of a lot of pass rush. And if you're going to stop Kirk Cousins at all or force any of those turnovers or bad plays from him, you have to get a pass rush. I mean, over the last 3 years coming into this year, he was the leader in fumbles. But you got to get after him and force him to fumble first. And there's a massive difference. There is with almost every quarterback, but with him, it's particularly stark from when he's kept clean to when he's been pressured. So, and you see that sometimes he hangs on to the ball a little too long. He tries to be the guy that's going to hang in the pocket and make that heroic throw, and that can lead to some mistakes. But if he's not pressured at all, and Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen have time to complete their routes, I mean, there's no stopping them. I've seen Thielen and Diggs tear apart much better defenses than the Bills on a week-to-week basis, and it just seems to me like it's going to be very, very difficult for them to even create enough pressure that would slow the Vikings offense down even a little. And, the Vikings also haven't gotten Dalvin Cook going really yet. He's coming off the ACL injury for his knee, and the offensive line has played a role in that, but it seems like they're going to really ramp it up to try to use Dalvin Cook even more probably this week. So, I mean, I think as far as the Vikings' perspective going into this game, they should be looking at it as they could put up huge point totals just like the Ravens and just like the Chargers did.
Mm-hmm. And, on that Bills defense in the secondary, there's some issues right now. Obviously making national news, Vontae Davis decided to quit, retire at halftime last week. Leaving the Bills with only two healthy, active cornerbacks in, Tre'Davious White, their first-round pick last year, and then Lafayette Pitts, a guy that, was fighting for a roster spot, throughout the preseason. So Philip Gaines has an elbow injury. He's day-to-day. It's not sure if they're not sure if he's going to play this week. So expect the Bills to make some moves, add some depth at that cornerback position, but then you look at the linebacker spot, Tremaine Edmonds has flashed some of that really exciting talent early on this season, but he's also had some struggles. I mean, last week in coverage, especially in that intermediate passing game, he was beat a bunch of times by Melvin Gordon, and you talk about Cook and you talk about Thielen, a guy that just makes his money across the middle and in that intermediate area, and they can have a big game against this secondary. And I think that I wanted to ask you, just being away from, Buffalo and kind of looking at it from the national perspective, what was the takeaway from that whole Vontae Davis situation?
Well, having been there and seen Mike Mularkey quit the team, seen Kyle Orton randomly retire at the end of the season, and Doug Marrone just leave himself, I wasn't terribly surprised because it's kind of been the history of this organization post Jim Kelly and Doug Flutie to have these types of things happen where they make national news for something that's gone wrong like this and something maybe that you've never seen before. And, I think that a lot of people around the country looked at them making the playoffs finally as a potential turning point. But when you look at all of the talent that has left Buffalo since the Doug Whaley era even, it looks like a team that is destined for 0-16 or 1-15 season and has to undergo a complete rebuild. So, I guess I wasn't really surprised that they would be making headlines for something strange like that, having seen that happen over and over and over again when I was in Buffalo. But I think my perspective on it is, I look at what Davis said as an explanation, and I kind of get it. Are you really going to go risk your body for a team that's not going to win any games? So if you've got your guaranteed base salary, I get it. He just wants to take the money and run because he doesn't feel like going out there and doing it anymore. So in a way, I feel for him because he probably didn't sign up for a team that was going to be this bad. He signed up for a team that made the playoffs last year. At the same time, it is embarrassing. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. When it's a headline like that and you're getting killed in these games and Nathan Peterman has a 0 quarterback rating and his coach says he has to go watch the tape. I mean, it looks like an organization that is just sort of floundering still when it appeared for a minute that they had turned a corner, and this is just more evidence of that.
Mm-hmm. You know, Sean McDermott has made a very significant pivot after, you know, talking up the team during the preseason, talking about putting the best players out there that are going to help this team win games. And now he's talking a lot about the fact that, you know, it's a very young team and you got to watch these guys develop. Very, very, big shift in terms of what he was talking about a little while ago. The team released Jeremy Curley, the most veteran wide receiver they had on the roster, ahead of last week's game. Kind of a puzzling move when you have a rookie quarterback out there. But I want to shift it over to the Minnesota defense. I mean, obviously one of the best units in the league on that side of the football. You know, for Bills fans that maybe not familiar with them, I know Everson Griffin makes all the headlines, but what makes this Vikings defense so scary?
Well, first I would say that the Bills probably should have just kept A.J. McCarron and let him come to Minnesota and get killed, because I've seen a number of rookie quarterbacks try to go up against this defense, and it's not good, home or road, but especially at home, because at every level they have Pro Bowl talents. On the defensive line, they have 4 Pro Bowl caliber players. Sheldon Richardson's addition, he's been a monster in these first 2 weeks. He's put so much pressure on quarterbacks. He's blowing up offensive lines, and he's the 4th biggest name on the defensive line. I mean, Danielle Hunter just signed a $70 million contract. He looks like he's even taking the next step from being one of the best young pass rushers in the league. Everson Griffin is a dominant player and should be considered one of the best all around. It's not just his pass rushing, but also run stopping. Very few teams are able to run against them. And Linval Joseph is the premier nose tackle in the NFL. I put him up against any other nose tackle. I'm always stunned when teams will run on 3rd and short, because every time they get stuffed by Linval Joseph, and he's kind of the glue that keeps it together. And that's just the start of this defense. I mean, the linebackers, Anthony Barr has been a multiple-time Pro Bowler. Eric Kendricks just signed a $50 million contract. And in the secondary, you have, to me, the best safety in the game, Harrison Smith, and one of the best shutdown corners, Xavier Rhodes. And by the way, other young players around them. Trey Wayans is still improving. Mike Hughes was a first-round draft pick this year. I mean, this defense is the culmination of 5 years of work of Mike Zimmer stacking it up with talent. And last year, it was no fluke that they were number 1 in points and number 1 in yards allowed. And I think through 2 weeks, they have been very good considering who they were going up against, a Kyle Shanahan offense, and then Aaron Rodgers, of course. Hobbled or not, he's still Aaron Rodgers. And for the most part, they were pretty strong against him too.
Mm-hmm. Pretty scary stuff. And I mean, we're talking about a Bills offense that ranks 31st in the league right now in passing, 25th in rushing. LaShawn McCoy's going into this game dinged up. He's got some torn cartilage around his ribs. So I think in this game you have to protect your rookie quarterback. I mean, like you said, great point. They probably should have kept McCarron. That was a very hot topic, you know, when they decided to trade him, getting a 5th round pick after spending the entire preseason and training camp, you know, working these 3 guys out. I think you got to protect him. I think you got to get, you know, the running game going, or at least try to get rid of the ball quick. I mean, there was a few plays last week that, you know, Allen's a gamer. Like, he's going to sit back there a la Aaron Rodgers and try to make plays, but I don't know if he's necessarily at that point of his career yet where he can sit back there for 5 to 7 seconds when that pass rush is going to be coming, especially behind this very poor offensive line and with a kind of a lack of weapons behind him. So I think that, you know, this Bills offensive strategy in this game is going to be interesting to watch, because, you know, a game like this could ruin a young quarterback, or at least set him back a little bit as he's trying to, you know, develop. Ryan Dable spoke yesterday at availability that he was very impressed with a lot of things. He's still developed. He's still young. But, no, we'll learn a lot about Josh Allen and this coaching staff in this game, I think. But before we get out of here, I want to give our 3 keys to the game. You for the Vikings, me for the Bills. Run through it real quick. Give me your first one.
Well, I mean, I think it's just to hit the heck out of Josh Allen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't doubt that they can do that, especially since the Bills let or traded away Cordy Glenn, which I didn't quite understand, moving away from a quality left tackle. But the fact that they can't really stop anyone's pass rush, this is one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. So the first is clearly just getting after him.
For me, I think the second half defense that the Bills had against the Chargers last week, Phillip Rivers, another top quarterback, has to be there for all 60 minutes for this team to even have a chance. Lorenzo Alexander, I spoke to him after the game last week, and he said, listen, he was impressed with Josh Allen. There was that viral moment where he went on the sidelines and was kind of imploring the defense to get him the ball back. He's got all the characteristics, but the defense has to do their part and not put him in a situation where he's down 14-0 after the first quarter. And that may be the case. I mean, you're going up against one of the best teams in the league. That might be the case, but the defense has to do its best to limit the scoring from that Minnesota Vikings offense.
The second one, I kind of mentioned, is get Dalvin Cook more involved in the running game. And if there's ever an opportunity to do that, I think it's this week to get his confidence up a bit. He's coming off the ACL injury, and he's been a huge weapon in their receiving game over the first 2 weeks. He had 6 catches in week 1. He had a 24-yard reception where he lined up as a wide receiver and ran a slant route, which kind of speaks to his overall skill. And if I was grading him for the first 2 weeks, I'd say he's been very good, but the offensive line hasn't given him a whole lot of chances. I saw a stat that in the first week, he had 45 yards after contact, but only 40 total yards from scrimmage. So they have not done very well in blocking for the run, and if there's an opportunity to do that this week, I think that they will ultimately get that done, especially if they get their center Pat Elflein back, who is kind of the best player you wouldn't know if you were outside Minnesota. But last year they drafted in the 3rd round, and he immediately became kind of a franchise centerpiece to build on in that offensive line, and he's been out with offseason surgery, still recovering. If he comes back, then I think that totally changes the dynamic up front, and they will be able to get Dalvin Cook going.
Mm-hmm. I spoke about it a little bit before, but my number 2 one is, obviously Josh Allen has to limit the mistakes. You watch in these games when, young quarterbacks, I mean, Nathan Peterman is a perfect example, the Chargers last year and then the opener this year. You start throwing interceptions, or you put the ball on the ground, and you give this defense confidence early, and then this offense extra possessions, and it's going to get ugly quick. I think a win here, as a 17-point dog, 0-2, the lack of depth on this team, a real win here would be if Josh Allen is able to manage this offense, keep it moving as much as possible, get a few first downs, especially in the first half, establish some confidence in this offense, and then as we move into the second half, hopefully you're there. But I think that it's going to be a tough test for Josh.
Yeah, my third one is just make quick work. Don't mess around. Don't take the entire first half and be slow on offense a little bit like they were against Green Bay. Make it 21-0 quick, because this team has to go from the Buffalo game right out to play the Los Angeles Rams. So if this game is over by halftime, more or less, you could even be talking about putting in Trevor Siemian in the second half. And I know that it's kind of disrespectful to talk NFL team versus NFL team about this game as if it's like a college game where you're talking about, Alabama playing Akron or something. But the gap is so big that the line is absurd. And I don't know if I've ever seen one that big. But if you're the Vikings, you have a Super Bowl caliber team that you've been building for a long time, a stable front office, a quarterback you paid $84 million, a top-notch coach, all those things. Like, you've been building for this. The Buffalo Bills coming in as a team that's tearing it down with a rookie quarterback who, in my mind, was not someone who was ready to play right away, or not even really close coming out of college. It just has the recipe for the Vikings to just show up and blow them out. And if they can, and you don't have to play Everson Griffin the whole game and Linval Joseph the whole game, and you can go into Thursday a little bit more rested maybe than the Los Angeles Rams, there could be some benefit to that. So it's, don't crack the door open and take them seriously. Don't allow it to be any type of trap game or anything like that, or don't keep it close. Just keep the foot on the pedal and be able to rest some of those starters in the second half.
And for me, finally, before we get out of here, I think the ends of the line, the tackles, Deion Dawkins for the Bills and Jordan Mills, have struggled at times. I mean, there was one play last week against the Chargers where Melvin Ingram came flying around untouched and just blew Josh Allen up. I mean, against good defensive lines, you need your tackles to at least give him enough time to make his drop. I mean, we're talking about 3-step, 5-step drops that he wasn't even able to complete. So I think for this team, or for this game to even stay close, that offensive line has to step up. The coaching staff seems to still be confident that they have the guys in here that are going to figure it out. That's remains to be seen, but this will be a very good litmus test for this line, and especially a young Dawkins, like you mentioned earlier. Getting rid of Cordy Glenn last year, they put all of their money on the table, and they basically said, we believe in this guy, and we think that he's the future. And now we're going to see, against some of these top defensive ends in the league, if that's really the case. Matthew, before we get out of here, why don't you give a little shout out where people can find your work, throughout the season and especially this weekend?
Yeah, for sure. 1500ESPN.com and also the Purple Podcast. We will have plenty of coverage on the podcast leading up to Bills and Vikings.
All right, guys, and for all your Buffalo Bills content, keep it locked on to NYUp.com and Syracuse.com, and we'll see you Sunday for the game.